All right, so good morning, everyone. I'm Shauna Taroso. I am the CEO of the Realtors Association of York and Adams County. Thank you all so much for joining us here today. We have a great presentation lined up for you in which we have Kurt Miller, who is the Director of MLS Policy and Advocacy for Bright MLS. And Kurt is going to be discussing the topic of advocacy matters, in that we're going to be going over the top Q&A questions that we're getting in terms of Bright MLS accuracy issues that are happening right now in the marketplace. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kurt.
All right, thank you very much, Shauna, and very many thanks to York and Adams County for inviting me to do this presentation with everyone. We always relish every opportunity to get in front of our subscribers and discuss policy with them, because we find that tends to be a pretty big knowledge gap with a lot of our subscribers, and people can find themselves in uncomfortable situations because I'm not fully understanding what the rules are in participation with the MLS, especially now that we have been sort of ramping up our enforcement of our rules over the spring because of a lot of the complaints we were getting. It's just that people were ignoring the rules or violating the rules or not knowledgeable of the rules. And we're seeing increases in number of detected violations. So we're getting in front of everyone to sort of discuss what's been going on with enforcement over the spring and early this summer. As Shauna mentions, go over the biggest questions that we're getting in our accuracy and policy team. We're also going to go over the top 3 violations that we are currently sending out, regardless of the questions that we're getting. And we're going to do a very quick conversation about the new listing assistant that just went out yesterday. Now, before we do get started, a couple of things here, because this is being recorded. One is that any information that I'm going to discuss with you today about policy is deemed accurate as of today, July 21st, 2021. Any viewings of this at a date afterwards, I would and have questions, I would contact the accuracy and policy team, because things can change over time. We do regularly update our policy. We don't have huge updates, but we'll tweak our policy going forward, trying to create a better work environment for everybody. So again, today's date is July 21st, 2021. All information is deemed accurate as of today. So let's go ahead and jump in to some of our top subjects regarding policy that are coming up with our subscribers. Well, first and foremost, just yesterday, we recently released Listing Assistant, which is our new listing management or listing entry procedure. And you might be asking, why is the policy guy sitting here talking to you about Listing Assistant? Because from a policy perspective, this presents a ton of opportunities for more accurate information, but also the opportunity for some challenges as well due to the responsibility of the information. So what do you get when you're using Listing Assistant inside of Bright? Where you get a smarter search to be able to find the appropriate subject property for publication. You get comparative public records and previous listings in order to reference to make sure you're selecting accurate information, and the ability to enter it in more quickly. You get to easily see where information differs between the public record and previously published listings. They can quickly add info to your listing, decreasing listing entry time. Now, keep in mind, that's the real goal of this, is to reduce that time to entry. And after just one day, we had about 1,000 new listings were entered into the MLS yesterday using our new listing entry system. And in just the first day, keep in mind, the first day anybody using this, we saw a 20% reduction in the time that it takes to go from the start of publishing a listing to actually publishing it. And that's a tremendous benefit to everybody, because as we know, time is money, and then less time that you spend entering in a listing, then more time you can spend with your clients and doing the things that you do to go ahead and make the money that you need to, put your kids in college and such. A couple of things we do want to mention, though, is we provide the information from tax records and I think up to 5 different other sources. So you could have 4 different listings to choose from the past. Keep in mind, we do this as a convenience. So you can take a look at the public record. You can use location, use map information. You can pull in previous beds and baths and previous listings. We don't include any copyright information, though. So any remarks cannot be copied over from previous listings, and photos cannot be copied over from previous listings unless they're your listing. If they were your listing, then you can, of course, have the option to be able to use those going forward. But in the end, this is a courtesy, and every listing is its own individual entity, and the listing agent is always responsible in the end for the accuracy of that information. So just because you used information that was on a previous listing, if that listing was inaccurate, that does not provide any kind of like a get out of jail free card for having inaccurate information on that listing. It's always up to the listing agent and broker to ensure that that listing is as accurate as possible related to the most recently known information. That could be the public record. It could be just you having access to the property and then presenting the most accurate reflection of the information possible. But again, just because you're using previous listings to enter in a new listing, that doesn't mean that suddenly that previous agent is responsible for whatever you copy over. It is always a responsibility of the current listing broker and listing agent. Again, any questions throughout this presentation, please feel free to go ahead and enter them into the chat section. We're going to tackle questions at the end of today's presentation. So again, tremendous benefit. We really hope that you'll take advantage of it. We do have opportunities available all through the next couple of weeks. We have webinars. We have our, we call it our booth, where you can go into a live Zoom all day long and talk with one of our success coaches about this. We want to provide as much resources as possible because you know not everybody gets a new listing every day. You might not have an opportunity to use it for 2 more weeks. So we're going to make sure you have plenty of opportunity to get education on the new system. But let's jump right now into our top 3 violations that we have been sending out all spring. So we're going to have questions later on, but we want to address the top 3 violations. These are notices that are being sent by us over the last 3 months. The first and foremost is delinquent dates. We recently ramped up enforcement on this because we just saw so many listings that we found that were closing, that were moving to expired, but they should have closed. They were closed on paper in the office, but the listing agents, brokers never closed them out inside of the MLS. And that provides really serious challenges because number 1, you're not looking at the right status. Number 2, you're losing out on comps. It's affecting appraisals. And it's the very core of what people search by inside of the MLS is driven by these close dates and these contingency dates. I know everyone here, when you search for an MLS and an MLS listings, you want to search by status, confident that you're going to get back all of the listings that are in that status. That's what these dates drive. These dates drive the accuracy of the end listing status that you search by and rely on and share with your clients. So we just want to reiterate to everyone, it is everyone's responsibility to make sure you are keeping these close dates and contingency dates current with the best known information. Now, keep in mind, if you do receive a notice based on delinquent dates, you will have 3 days to update that before ever being assessed a fine on your system. So again, you provide 3 days even post being in arrears essentially on those dates before you'll ever get an assessed fine. So please make sure you're paying attention to your notices. Also, we get questions about this quite frequently. What happens if your buyer and seller are still negotiating? You have an agreement of sale, but the agreement of sale date has passed, but you're still in good faith negotiations. Well, just because that date passes does not mean that agreement of sale is necessarily null and void. If that is the case, we give every listing agent the right to be able to enter in the best known information, which is their estimate of when they believe it's going to close, or more information about the closing date will be found. So feel free to push that date out if, again, you're in good faith negotiations and that date comes and goes. You can preemptively push that out to an estimate, just so long as you are updating that field when the firm date becomes known. Again, the entire purpose of this is to make sure the statuses are reflecting accurately and the listings that are closing are being closed in the MLS and not just on paper inside of the office. So feel free, again, if you have an estimate, you can push it out, but you always have to keep those dates current because that's what's going to end up controlling what that status is going to be at the end of the day. Also, keep an eye on your workspace. We provide notifications prior to any enforcement going out. You get a reminder 14, 7, and 3 days prior to any listings expiring, closing, or contingencies coming due. You can catch this well in advance before ever getting a notification from Bright if you keep an eye on your notifications on your homepage. The second find that we've been sending out quite a bit this spring is public branding. Public branding is not allowed inside of any publicly viewable areas of an MLS listing, say public remarks or on photographs or even in driving directions. Any external links, branding, contact information, none of this is permitted because the MLS at its heart is not a marketing company. We are a voluntary broker cooperative in which all of our brokerages and agents come together, promising to work together to supply information so that buyer agents can be buyers, bring the buyers, and the listing brokers can bring the listings, and everybody's super happy in the end. Now, for a period of time during the pandemic, we did lift the restriction on this, mainly because in the spring of 2020, real estate kind of died, especially in Pennsylvania. There was nothing going on. You couldn't even get access to a property in Pennsylvania to be able to take a photograph. So our CEO gave us a mission, which was keep this market alive by any means possible for a period of time. So we lifted the ban on this. It had always been restricted in the past. We temporarily lifted the ban on this again so people could get their listings out there if they were available and share as much information as possible. Well, we probably kept that ban lifted a little bit too long. But come in early April, we decided to go back to the previous non-pandemic rules, which always restricted this material from listings. Because keep in mind, when we're talking about putting a listing into the MLS, the primary purpose of the MLS is not to distribute that listing out to some publicly available resource or website. The main purpose of that is to offer that listing for cooperation with all the other cooperating agents and brokers, 95,000 of them inside of our footprint. When those brokers and agents on the buy side share those listings with their clients, and your branded information is inside of the publicly viewable areas on the client reports, that's encouraging them to contact the listing agent directly, and that bypasses buyer agency. And that's the reason why in an MLS that is not allowed, because it's a cooperative organization. And when you supply your direct contact information to another broker's client, that's not cooperative, even if it's not intentional when you're doing it. And again, any questions you have regarding that, please go ahead and enter those into the chat section. I'm happy to address them at the end of today's presentation. Oh, I want to mention here, most of this information that you're sharing in public remarks has always been allowed in agent remarks. So you just enter this information to agent remarks. The important part is you are including, right, the buyer brokerage in the conversation. They can make the decision to share these external links, this contact information. Maybe it's a website that's related to the community in which they're selling the property. Again, not to bypass the buyer broker to share this, but to include them is what the imperative is. And finally, compensation offers. And this is something that we get questions about quite frequently, especially in this type of a market, is that all compensation that is offered inside of Bright must be offered based on the gross sale price of the listing as a percentage, a flat dollar amount, or the combination of the two. So you could offer X percent of the gross sale price plus or minus X amount of dollars if you wanted, or just offer an X amount. Also, Bright only requires the form of the compensation, and then it must be a positive value. Bright does not make any statements on how much any brokerage must offer. And if we did, the Department of Justice would be super interested in that, because that's called price fixing. So again, the only requirement in Bright when it comes to compensation is that it must be expressed as either a percentage of the gross sale price, a flat dollar amount, or a combination of the two. That said, that's what's being offered and promised in the MLS. Whenever two brokers come to agreement outside of the MLS, in regards to compensation takes precedence over whatever is promised inside the MLS. And we encourage all brokers to cooperate about every aspect of the real estate business, including compensation if they need to, if the concession becomes an issue. But the promise in the MLS is essentially a guarantee that if we can't come into an agreement, we end up going to arbitration, mediation, or the courts, that's likely was going to be used as that promise at the time that the offer was made and then accepted. Now, what are our most frequently asked questions and related to the spring and summer of 2021? Well, one we get a lot is, are sight unseen offers allowed in the MLS? And the answer to that is yes. And that's quite frankly because in order to be in the MLS as a listing, you have to have an exclusive listing agreement. If you have an exclusive listing agreement, every state that we cover, including District of Columbia, compels that offer must be presented to the seller, and the seller can go ahead and accept that offer if they like, regardless of whether or not that property has been provided for access. So yes, if the listing is in the MLS, whether it's an active status or coming soon or active under contract, if there is a sight unseen offer, the seller may accept that. And in those cases, it would go directly to pending, even if there was no showing. And we are seeing an increased amount of this over time. In a normal marketplace where you have 6 months of inventory, you see a property going right, for example, from coming soon to closed, or directly from active to close in the same day, that would be very curious. In today's market, when there's like 3 seconds of inventory that are out there and buyers are taking loans on their internal organs to get the cash necessary to compete, that isn't often the case. And I'll give you an example of one case that I worked just recently. Was we had a complaint that an agent had moved a listing from coming soon over to pending and accepted an offer, and the assumption was that property was shown when it should not have been shown. Well, we investigated fully with the agent, including all the correspondence and paperwork that they had. And this is what we're finding over and over again, is that the listing agent and seller didn't want to show it. It wasn't coming soon. They were getting inundated with offers on that, not with offers, but with requests to show while it was coming soon. And the agent showed us documentation had been refusing offers. So finally, out of frustration, the agent took a recorded cell phone video of a walkthrough of the property while it was in mid-renovation, and then sent it out to the people requesting showings and said, hey, listen, here's a 5-minute video of the property. If this is enough, you can go ahead and submit an offer, but I can't provide access to the property. That's fine. A recorded video is basically a virtual tour. And I saw the video. This was not a very good video. She got 5 offers on the property based on that rudimentary video, which is basically advertisement. That's the world that we're living in right now. So in 6 months of inventory, what would be a red flag is not necessarily a red flag in today's environment. Again, I've seen properties that have been selling in under half an hour of posting into the MLS. And when we investigate it, it's legitimate. They show us the correspondence, the inundation of offers that are coming in. And the Wall Street Journal also did a recent article on the rise of iBuyers, institutional iBuyers, in which now we have not only just companies like Blackstone and Zillow iBuyers coming in to offer properties, but you have pension funds, investment groups, hedge funds purchasing residential homes and competing with buyers for those properties. And almost the majority of all of these are sight unseen as well. Now, if it's sold off the MLS, that is not allowed. So here's the key difference. If there is an agreement of sale that is accepted and completed prior to the listing being entered in the MLS, it is not eligible for entry until it closes, and then only as a comp. The reason why is that listing was never made available in the MLS to all the cooperating brokers and agents. Listings that are not made available for cooperation, even if it's a half an hour before getting an offer, right, are not eligible to be entered in traditionally as active and then pending and then closed. Again, if you agree to an offer prior to being published in the MLS, that is not eligible until it closes, and it's only eligible as a comp. Because again, at heart, what are we? We are a voluntary cooperative of brokers. The keyword's cooperative. that listing is not offered for cooperation, it does not meet the eligible requirements for entry until it closes, and then again, only as a comp. And the comp entry is only allowed to allow that data to be available for appraisers and other agents when they're producing CMAs and appraisals. That's the intent of that, not to provide attribution to that listing sale. I also find it's useful to go over these statuses just to clarify whether it is or isn't allowed. Coming soon and active are very, very similar statuses. And there's only one difference between the two. And that difference is coming soon listings by the way, as a requirement for coming soon, you have to be able to accept offers and present them to your seller. If you're not, it's not eligible for entry as anything inside the MLS. But you're not accepting showings because it's not ready for prime time. And there are many people who use this status absolutely the way it's intended. And so you can use the coming soon status. If you have a client, let's give you an example. They've been in their house for 30 years. They're moving into an adult living facility, and they need to clear the house out, get a dumpster, take care of some of the clutter that's accrued over 30 years. Well, you might want to start, take that contract, but you need 3 weeks to get it cleared out. And you have to enter it in the MLS once you get that contract, right? So if you have 3 weeks remainder, put it into coming soon. It lets everybody know that it's going to be coming soon. You can even, by the way, during this time period, accept requests for showings for dates after it's active. So if you have, again, you're anticipating you're going to come on the market in 14 days, while you're coming soon, you can't show the property, but you can accept schedule showings for the date that you plan to be active in the MLS. The important part is that once you are active inside the MLS or active under contract, that you are accepting showings as of that date and providing access to the property. I hope that's clear. If not, again, you can ask questions. I'll make sure I clarify that a little bit later on. That's the biggest thing. Coming soon, not accepting showings, but I can schedule them for the date in which I will be active and beyond, which is when I am accepting showings and accepting offers. And then if you're active under contract, that means that you have an agreement of sale, but your seller wishes to continue to show the property and entertain offers. If your seller is not doing both of those things, that listing must go pending at that time. Active under contract isn't an advertising status. It is a showing and offer status while under agreement of sale. A little bit more about coming soon listings. One is, just to reiterate, it is under a listing agreement. We're not talking about off MLS listings. We're talking about coming soon. These are listings under an exclusive agreement of sale, but they're not currently accepting showings for up to 21 days. What is a showing? So how are we defining showings? A showing is a hosted tour of a property. This can be physical or virtual and includes open houses and broker tours. But again, while you're coming soon, if you say took a listing today, but you are not allowing any showings until the open house on Sunday, you could put it into coming soon, advertise that open house is going to be available on Sunday, and then you'll schedule showings afterwards. As long as you move it to active on that date, you're perfectly fine. Again, you can advertise when you're accepting showings while not actually accepting them during that time frame. And again, if you have questions, feel free to ask when we get the question answer period. Again, they have to accept offers. And then why no showings? Because it's coming soon. It's not ready for prime time, but it provides exclusive access inside of the MLS for people to be able to view these properties that are coming up, to give to their buyers, to give that little bit of added oomph for them to be able to then see it coming and then schedule showings to the date in which it will be active. What happened with off MLS policy enforcement? Getting a lot of questions about this. We did change up our enforcement, but not the rule, on May 10th. So just to let everybody know, the rule is the same as it ever was for off MLS enforcement. Bright adopted our clear cooperation or off MLS policy in October of 2019. And that rule allowed office exclusive listings, along with the completion of an office exclusive form and submittal to Bright. But there is no public marketing that is allowed on those listings. And if there is public marketing, that listing must be entered into the MLS within 1 business day or receive an immediate $5,000 fine for the first violation of that rule. Now, what did change about this? Well, on May 10th, we made an adjustment to enforcement now that we believe that the educational phase is well behind us. What do I mean by that? So we adopted this on October 19th. It was later adopted by NAR, or a version of it, on November of 2019 as well, and then enacted in early 2020, spring of 2020. But we understood this is a $5,000 fine, right? We don't want to start slinging out $5,000 fines for people who just generally aren't aware of the policy at all. So we added in an unwritten extra courtesy notice to act as the educational aspect of this, as well as, by the way, all the communications that went out from Bright, adding it to our training classes, and the national conversation taking place at NAR throughout the last year and a half that this policy has essentially been a hot topic. So we put in the extra time to give people an opportunity to learn about the rule and come into compliance before getting a $5,000 fine. So here's how it operated previous to May 10th. Is let's say we have today, we find that a listing has been in, I'm sorry, let me go back in time. Let's go back in last Monday. A listing agent has an office exclusive listing, completes the form, sends it over to Bright as they should, but begins to publicly advertise that listing. That listing would then need to be entered into Bright within one business day. Well, Tuesday rolls past, it's Wednesday morning. The listing has not been entered in the MLS, and as of last Wednesday, that listing has been in violation. However, it's not in the MLS. There's nothing for us to be notified that it's in violation. So time goes past. We haven't found it yet. Subscribers haven't reported it, but we find it today. Previous to May 10th, what we would do is contact the listing agent and let them know you're in violation of Bright's office exclusive policy. Please enter your listing within one business day. An extra one business day was being given as a courtesy to help educate our subscribers so they were not getting $5,000 violations for things that they weren't aware of. Well, over a year later, what we found in enforcing this was that the same people were doing this over and over and over again. People weren't unaware what the policy was. It's been a hot topic for well over a year. They were creating workflows based on the courtesy notice and not on the policy itself, in an effort to get as much off MLS advertising time as possible without getting the fine. So on May 10th, we advertised that we were changing how we enforce it. We are moving it to every broker gets one courtesy notice per year for the first violation, and then every violation afterwards is an immediate $5,000 fine to the violating listing agent that is assigned. And again, it's basically to be a heads up to the broker to let them know to contact their agents that anything further is going to be a $5,000 penalty on that account. And the $5,000 fine is very advised. What's the intent of the policy? Well, it's to help discourage non-cooperation for the purposes of getting both sides of the transaction. Well, unless you have an adequate fine for that, you're basically doing a tax. If we had a $250 fine for a violation of this policy, people would pay a $250 fine all day, every day, if they were getting an additional $5,000 in compensation. So the idea was to make it hefty enough that it removes the financial benefit of violating cooperation clause and then selling it internally while advertising it outside of the office. Just to let you know, public marketing includes flyers displayed in windows, yard signs, digital marketing on public-facing websites, brokerage website displays, including IDX and VOW, digital communications marketing, multi-brokerage listing sharing networks, and applications available to the general public. What isn't enforced in this? We don't enforce one-on-one conversations. So if you get an inquiry about a property, you have a dumpster in front of the property, people are kind of like hawk snail looking for these things and they inquire about it. You can provide information about that property on a one-on-one basis. You can't share with two people at the same time, but one-on-one is fine. Also, that extension and that leniency ends at the point that someone requests a showing, because the showing requirement kicks in. So if someone requests a showing based on the one-on-one conversation and they're outside of your broker of record, then you must enter it into Bright as active the day that you're providing access. Now, why do we have this rule, and why does NER feel so strongly about this rule? Well, for one, because we believe that consumers deserve access to the widest and broadest set of listing data possible. They absolutely should not be shut out or brokers shut out by exclusive listing networks and not having access to all the properties that can be available to them. They don't win that way, right? Other bodies might win, but they don't win unless they have access to everything. And quite frankly, if you've ever tried to search for properties that are rentals or vacation rentals, then you can probably empathize with the nightmare of not having access to one database of all the information. Because you have to go from website to website to website, broker to broker to broker to collect everything that is available when it comes to rentals. And we don't want to have the MLS become that. We don't think that's a service to consumers. And again, also as agents and brokers, you shouldn't be shut out and your client shouldn't be shut out from accessing all the information, because that information is only being shared in a small select brokerage sharing network that's outside of the MLS, but only like certain brokers that get to see that. Also, we have a very keenly aware the Department of Justice is taking very close look at standards and practices and whether or not they're in the best benefit of the consumer. And we firmly believe that having one database of all that accessible information is in the best benefit of the consumer. And finally, fair housing. You cannot use the term office exclusive without the root word of exclude. And anytime that you're excluding anyone from viewing property, you run a very strong risk of violating fair housing, whether intentional or not. And I gave you a case study from a presentation that I did with the Coming Soon group in Facebook. About 5,000 folks were members of this. Someone reported as part of the conversation that they were an agent and they had a rancher that was an office exclusive. This rancher, by the way, had 0 stairs in it. It had a ramp walk up, had everything that was nicely set out to have 0 stairs available. They took it as an office exclusive inside of their brokerage, filled out all the forms, did not advertise it outside of their broker of record, sold it within Bright rules and regulations. And once they sold it, they advertised that they sold it internal to their company, which, by the way, once a listing sells, it's office exclusive, you may advertise that, because at that point, you're not trying to market that property, you're now marketing your brokerage, and that's within your rights to do so. But someone saw that. And the person who saw that, for lack of a better word, had a disability where that property would have been perfect for them. They never had an opportunity to even put an offer on that property because they never knew about it. They contacted FHA. FHA contacted the brokerage and asked, what did you do to make sure that listing was made available to the broadest and most diverse audience possible? And that brokerage was put under the gun to provide proof that they did just that. And unfortunately, they were still in process with FHA at the time we had the conversation. Not sure how it turned out, but I'm sure it was very uncomfortable regardless of what it was and how that turned out. So again, one does not have to intend to violate fair housing, and one can be completely within the rules of Bright and still be in violation of fair housing, just to be very, very careful when taking office exclusives. Can I increase my list price in the MLS just prior to going under contract? The quick answer to that is, it depends. From an MLS perspective, what we're concerned about is making sure that any price change is supported by a written request from the seller related to the listing agreement and the list price. So long as your seller is making that request, and then, by the way, this is for any price change, not just one that is an increase right before it goes under contract, right? Any price change in the MLS should be supported by a written seller request authorizing that change. And Bright reserves the right to audit this material to make sure these price changes are being made accurately. So as long as the seller has an email to you requesting this to happen outside of the agreement of sale, again, it has to be about the list price, not the sale price, that's okay. What isn't okay? One is not having documentation. You can't change the price unless you have written documentation from your seller authorizing you to do so. The second piece of it is the sale price or agreement of sale price is not a validating number to change a list price. That's underneath the agreement of sale information and the close price information. So what happens if we find someone who's in violation of this? We audit the documentation and there is no authorization related to the list price. What we'll do is we'll end up sanctioning the agent and then also changing the price back to the last authorized price according to the paperwork that is available on hand at that time. But as long as there is, again, that request from the seller related to the list price, that's okay from an MLS perspective, because we don't judge, we're not mind readers. We don't judge intention behind anything, just proper documentation. However, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that NER legal counsel has very strong opinions on this. And they released a paper, which I'll share with everybody in this PowerPoint, that said it's a possible red flag for mortgage fraud, that any price changes with the intent of affecting appraisal or mortgage are red flags for mortgage fraud at that time. I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV, but I want to make sure that you're aware of this. If your seller's making these types of requests, maybe to influence appraisal or mortgage, they should be very well aware of, that this could be, again, an item that can get them into hot water and get you into hot water too. Are you enforcing your rules, and or why does it take so long to enforce rules? And as a director of MLS policy, relatively new, I came from the regional vice president area. That's an excuse. I take that kind of personally because we are working very hard to process as many cases as possible. And we are processing more than we ever have before. We send out between 15 and 16,000 violation notices per month this spring. That's far more than we have ever sent out in the history of Bright. And that said, our primary accuracy and policy queue is still about 10 days behind. Now, what is causing a lot of this is an incredible amount of reporting coming in from our subscribers. And unfortunately, about 40% of it isn't valid. We're seeing people who either don't fully understand the rules and they are reporting things. Just the other day, we received one reported that a listing was erroneously entered as backing to trees. And they entered it because the trees that it backed to were not owned by the property. But that wasn't the question that people answered when entering in. It in fact backed to trees. There's no indication or requirement they have to own those trees. So that's the kind of reports that we're getting on a daily basis. There is some targeting that we see going on where people are going through and they're repeating just the violations on individual agents, and we're taking steps to try to keep that from happening. But the volume of what we're getting right now is far higher than we've ever had to process before. And fortunately, again, about 40% of what we're getting are not valid complaints, but we still have to process them like we process anything else, whether valid or not, and they all have to be fully investigated. So what are we doing to help make things better? One, we rewrote our rules. We didn't change our rules. We rewrote them to reduce them from 43 pages down to 14 pages and put them into human language and not necessarily lawyer language. We also adopted new technology called the Listing Data Checker, which either automatically or semi-automatically scans our database every 15 minutes for key violations. And some of these, again, are sent automatically, and we catch 100% of all of those violations that it finds. And we also changed our email address so that we would not get spammed or bulk mail quite so often. So make sure you're safe listing data checker at CoreLogic.com. We changed the email address again to make it more obvious what this was about. So if you receive an email from data checker at CoreLogic.com and it has Bright MLS in the subject line, that is from us. Please don't disregard that notice. And finally, we are working at proactive enforcement to test active listings for showings and also hunt down off MLS violations more readily, as opposed to relying upon subscribers to report them. How can I best avoid issues with accuracy and policy? I break it down to three pretty simple answers on this, but again, simple is a matter of perspective. One is be a full participant in the MLS. When a broker or an agent joins the MLS, it's a promise to their clients, the consumers, and cooperating brokers and agents. They're going to immediately publish your listings, keep them up to date and accurate, and cooperate to the fullest extent. You're not making a promise to advertise your listing to consumers. You're making a promise to all the other cooperating agents, all 95,000 of them out there, that you're going to work with them first. Advertisement is done by the broker. Now, we help brokers advertise by providing them their data, and facilitating syndication, but that's not the primary reason why an MLS exists. And if it were the only reason why an MLS would exist, well, what's the point? I mean, how many other websites are there that can provide real estate data? How many other websites are out there that can help you advertise your listing? The MLS is the single real estate institution that provides the baseline promise of cooperation between cooperating brokers. And that's the reason why an MLS exists. Everything else comes secondary. Second, respond to notices. That's one of the biggest problems that we see is people get notices and they just ignore them. And that is not going to go away. Our systems never forget. And all you're going to find is that you're going to be in violation with fines and penalties. And the people that ignore these notices are finding this can add up really, really quickly. So just to let you know, outside of branding, things like branded photos and branded remarks, almost all of our fines offer a 3-day grace period to be able to update the issue. So if you get a delinquent date notice on your listing, you have 3 days to update that and you'll never get an assessed fine. But if you ignore that notice on day 4, you'll be assessed a $250 fine. You're not billed that fine, but you're assessed it, and that starts your appeals period in which you have 20 days to correct the issue and then appeal that if you think that you either have a great track record and shouldn't be fined based on a first offense, or if you think you were fined erroneously for this. But every 3 days after you get fined that you don't correct the issue, you're going to get another $50 penalty. As a reminder, please correct your problem. Also, you cannot submit an appeal until after the issue has been corrected, because you are only appealing the fine. You're not appealing the policy. The policy is what the policy is. You're appealing the fine. After 20 days, and again, that's 23 days with a courtesy notice, that fine moves to billing along with all of its penalties. Once it moves to billing, it is no longer eligible for appeal, and you have to pay in full, or in 20 days, your account will be inactivated, like any other billing that you receive. So literally the worst thing you can do is ignore notifications. And also make sure you are whitelisting listing data checker at CoreLogic.com and looking for those emails to make sure that you are not missing these notifications. Also, when in doubt, check. If you have a question about this compensation model that you're using, or whether or not this can be included in the public remarks, we're available 8:30 to 5 p.m. Mondays and Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. Temporarily, we have in-service days on Wednesdays, like today, where we are just crunching through cases and reported accuracy issues so we can get through the backlog and get people answers. But again, Mondays and Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays, we're available for phone calls 8:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. And by the way, every day of the week outside of holidays, our support center is available, and they are well versed on our policy as well at a high level. But if you really want to get in the weeds on something, you'd want to contact our accuracy and policy department. So 3 things to keep in compliance. 1, be a full participant. And remember, everything you enter in the MLS isn't just about advertising that listing. It's about making sure you're communicating accurate information to all of your cooperating agents. 2nd, don't ignore notices. Whitelist the listing data checker at CoreLogic.com email address, and make sure you're looking out for these, because failure to respond to notices or deciding not to respond to them does not alleviate the need to pay fines. And then finally, when in doubt, check with us first, and then make sure you're publishing things that are within our rules. Also, make sure you're visiting our rewritten rules and new supporting documentation. You'll see here I provided links to all of our different documentation areas, our bright rules, and also individual policy documents on rules enforcement, clear cooperation, images and documents inside of the MLS. And we recently did make a change that unidentifiable people are allowed inside of listing photos, so that you can have aerial shots and exterior shots of more populated areas and not worry about whether or not 1 or 2 people made it in the background of your photo. So we recently made that adjustment. Now, if Aunt Edna is vacuuming the floor of the living room and you take the picture, that's not going to be allowed. But again, any unidentifiable people would be allowed inside of photos now. Also, make sure to check Bright's knowledge base. A lot of our use case scenarios and exemptions that we make for things like auction listings or new construction listings that aren't generally an issue for the majority of our subscribers are handled inside of our knowledge base. So make sure you check our knowledge base, and here are some examples. What's allowed in public and agent remarks? How do I offer compensation? How can I manage to be built new construction? We go through all those details outside of the primary rules document in our knowledge base to clarify those use case scenarios related to the rules. If we try to include them all in the written document, you'd have a 400-page rules document that nobody would read or understand. And most of the clarifications won't even apply to most of our subscribers. And then finally, make sure you're checking our Accuracy Matters articles written by yours truly, plugging myself, where we tackle the most topical items that are happening right now. One of my favorites that we wrote were "Don't do that, do this instead," where we go over some of our top violations and not only how to not do it, but what can you do that won't get you in violation that fits the need. So we just don't want to be about slapping people's hands and telling people what they can't do. We want to try to provide you with alternatives that keep you in compliance, but still help you meet your end business need. So at this point, that's the end of the formal presentation. We're going to open this up to Q&A for everyone here. Can you address the new photo policy? Oh, Brenda, very good question. The new photo policy, the only new part of the photo policy is that unidentifiable people are allowed inside of photos. Again, if you have like an aerial photo with a bunch of little people on the sidewalk, that's fine. Again, Aunt Edna in the living room, not fine. Uncle Clark sitting on the couch, not fine, right? And that's primarily because if you use someone else's likeness in a commercial context, that opens you and us up for lawsuits for benefiting off of their likeness without permission. So we cannot make a guarantee that everybody who's in your photo has given you express permission to use their image in a commercial context. So that's a very important reason why. Also, regardless of that rule, we have to be careful of fair housing, is that if you have a group of people in a photo, identifiable or not, if I can identify them all of being of one ethnicity or class, that's a violation of fair housing. So you have to make sure that people on our photos, they are sufficiently diverse. Oh, Brenda already answered, okay. Can you give an example of where the agent took a poor video virtual tour and sent it to interested agents and accepted a contract unseen? This is a violation according to Cummings rule discussed. This is not a violation. This is not a violation. A virtual tour, again, a virtual tour, or I'm sorry, a virtual showing or virtual open house is hosted live with an audience. A recorded video is basically a virtual tour, which has always been allowed in coming soon listings and is a part of advertisement. What you can't do is have an interaction with somebody live and streaming for the purposes of selling that house, having a Q&A and soliciting offers. That's what makes it the difference. A recorded video is basically a virtual tour. That is okay. That's advertisement. You can't have a scheduled visit, virtual or not, at a certain time with an interested party. That's the difference. Does that answer your question, John? Okay. How does the compensation offer become a violation? Compensation offers are a violation if either you're not offering any compensation, which is not allowed. Any compensation offer must be of a positive value. We don't dictate what that is, but it must be of a positive value. Now, the question we get most often is, can it be $1? By that rule, yes, it may be $1. Technically, could be a penny. Again, this has to be of a positive value. Again, we can't make a limit or a minimum because that's price setting, and the Department of Justice would be very interested about that. However, if you enter in an offer of X% and then put into compensation remarks, we only compensate on the net sale price minus seller's concession. That's what's called a contingent offer, and contingent offers are not allowed inside of the MLS. So you cannot compensate based on any contingent offers. Also, regarding showings, you cannot offer showings based on contingencies either. They must be unilaterally offered without discrimination. Give an example for a showing. You cannot say listing agent must join you on first visit for compensation. Nope, not allowed. That is contingent and not unilateral and not non-discriminatory. So keep in mind, any contingent offers or contingent showings are violations of the MLS. Now, procuring calls could come into play with things like this. We don't determine procuring calls. That will be determined by mediation, arbitration of the courts. That help you out with your question, Brenda? Okay, good. So again, avoid net compensation and just make it as simple as possible. Again, anything you agree to when it comes to compensation outside the MLS is fine. But the important piece is you're cooperating and you agree to it. You can't dictate it. And it's the biggest piece of confusion that we have with this. And also because some listing agents I talk to are under the impression that, wait a second, if whatever we come to, well, that's going to necessarily affect my seller's compensation to me. No, it doesn't. There's two pieces of compensation that are mutually exclusive from each other. Whatever the seller is compensating the listing brokerage, it's between the seller and the listing brokerage. Whatever is offered to the MLS from the listing brokerage to the buyer brokerage is between the listing brokerage and the buyer brokerage. That negotiation does not have necessarily any impact to the seller unless the seller wants to agree to it, right? So you cannot force that upon your seller. And if you were doing that and saying that you have to adjust what you're paying, I advise contacting the association, perhaps counsel, maybe the Pennsylvania Association of Realtors legal hotline about that, because there might be some issues there. Again, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not going to speak to it, but you should definitely investigate about the legality of doing that itself. And that's another reason why we try to keep it very simple. I'm going to give you a quick example of this. I do have to run after this example, though. I spoke with an agent, and the agent was extraordinarily upset when I spoke with. This was a couple of years ago. She was working with directly negotiating with the seller. It was a limited service agency, which isn't a problem, by the way. It's not a problem from an MLS perspective. But the seller didn't understand how compensation worked. So in their negotiations, the seller was very aggressive, pointed at the listing of the buyer broker or agent and said, I am not paying you a dime. Well, the listing agreement said X amount of percent, but the seller is telling who I'm negotiating with, I'm not getting paid anything. I talked with the agent and I let them know, I understand you're upset, but that seller was absolutely right. That seller isn't paying you a dime. That offer that was made by the listing broker, regardless if they're a limited service or not. And that's what's going to be owed. And in that stance, it was a mistake by the listing broker at the time. So the offer was accepted. That listing broker ended up paying out more to the cooperating broker than they received from their seller because they listed compensation wrong. This is the best example possible of what the seller is paying the listing broker has nothing to do with what the listing broker has promised to pay the cooperating broker. Any other questions about that? I do have to run, unfortunately. Has this been helpful? All right, excellent. Well, guys, thank you so very much for your time. I really appreciate it. And again, if you have any questions, please give us a call. And again, when in doubt, contact accuracy and policy, ask before you list. We can probably give you a good answer. And I advise using the phones. The phones will get you the quickest answer possible. Even if you leave a message, we get back to you within generally 48 hours.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kurt. We appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. If you have any further questions, you can send them to me and I can follow up with Kurt after this presentation to make sure they get answered. All right. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.